We're really excited to show you some of the best examples that we have available of the WCAG in practice. So we've got some short things planned for you today. So as you can see, as Paul mentioned, there are the WCAG 2.0 guidelines that cover single A, double A, and triple A compliance. From these guidelines, we're only going to cover a few and a few of the subsets within each of these guidelines because there's just not enough bandwidth to cover them. But we think that we have some really solid examples to take each of you through. So the first project that we have up is a project that we designed for CAT Pension. This is a pension site, one of the largest pension plans in Canada. And the first thing we're going to cover is the guideline 1.1, provide text alternatives for all non-text content. This is perhaps one of the most fundamentals of the guidelines. It's been around since the late 90s for sure. So I'll show you a quick example of the CAT website now. So as you can see, we are on CAT Pension's website, and there's a lot of interesting content here, but it's also chunked out in a fairly readable way. One thing you can see as part of the content is imagery. Now, for a non-visual reader of this website, this imagery is really meaningless. If it's blurry, if it's low vision or no vision at all, these images, although they're part of the aesthetic of the website, are not going to register for a non-visual user. So in this instance, when it comes to web development, it's important to include the alternative text for visual content. What I'm going to do is I'm going to peel back the curtain a bit and show you what that looks like on the code side of the website, just so you can understand how that works on a more practical level. Screen readers tend to look at this code and they look for these cues with both text and image and iconography and navigation elements. So right now you're seeing in a way what a screen reader may be looking at. Now I clicked on this image and you can see it's highlighted and we have this alt tag, which is short for alternative text. Now for non-visual readers, their screen reader will read this text verbatim, i.e. grandparents with daughter and grandson by a fall tree. Very descriptive, but it allows a non-visual user to start building out an idea of who this site is for, the types of content on the site, both visual and non-visual. The next example we have is 1.2. So this is about providing synchronized alternatives for multimedia. It may sound fairly cryptic at this point, but once I show you, it'll make a lot of sense. So back to the CAT Pension site. As you can see, we have plenty of content again here, but further down the page, we have a YouTube video. Now, the most important thing about this video is that you'll see it has a closed caption icon. Clicking on this icon is going to give us the closed captioning we want that is that synchronized text content with this multimedia. YouTube is a fairly good use case of this because it's a third-party tool that allows you to quickly upload things like closed captioning files. Although they do have live transcription, we don't usually recommend that because it's not best practices. Computers can only catch so much, so we tend to advise when you're uploading closed captioning, have someone properly compose the script and upload that file directly to YouTube. But as you can see, it's a pretty simple outcome from a seemingly cryptic guideline. So next up in our list, we are going to cover 3.1. As you can tell, these are in no particular order. We've selected our examples based off of the sites specifically, so we may be going a bit out of order with these guidelines. This is perhaps one of the most interesting guidelines for us because it spans more of the content creation side of things. So I will cover that out with the CAT site as well. All right, so what do we mean by understandable and readable? Well, we definitely mean keeping the content into what we call chunked content. Although long-form content is great, it tends to be fairly more of an exhaustive read. And we have to also understand that users tend to do a lot more scanning through sites. As you can see on the CAT website, much of the content for something like a pension plan, it is broken into sometimes 5 or less words with very explicit content written here. They're not using any jargon, which is very important because they want to be writing for, generally a readability around 8th grade English. That is some standards. You can find a bunch of different variants out there. But for them, it is pension plans, so their audience is focused on pensions. So there's a bit of leeway there. As you can see, the chunked content keeps things easily scannable, easily readable, and understood. Another important thing I want to pull out here is just how explicit the button text is. Rather than just saying read more, this call to action about the CAT 2021 valuation is very explicit in what they're going to be reading and where that button is going to be taking them. So this is true for everything down the page on the CAT website. They've been very explicit with where these buttons are going to take them and what their key function is. All right, next is a 1.3 where we ensure that information and structure can be separated from presentation. Again, this is going to be very easy once I demonstrate to you. But before then, I have a quick slide to just talk about the difference between visual presentation and the way this content is actually represented in the code. So on the left-hand side, we can see that we have headings 1 all the way to 5. These are sequential, and visually I can see that they're decreasing in size. This is great as a visual user where I can see that heading 1 is clearly more important. However, when it comes to a screen reader, how can I tell? Well, that's where headings come into play. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the HTML is structured to show this sequence. We have header 1, header 2, all the way up to header 5. And this is what appears in the code. This is important because it means that your screen reader is going to be reading these in sequence, and your users, your non-visual users and screen readers, will be able to understand where they are within the content. So I'm going to show a quick example of the visual background of the code again for this guideline. So I've clicked on this first block of text. It is the first block of text on the site. And as you can see highlighted in the code, it is a H1 element. Naturally, there should only be one H1 on the website at any given time because it is the entry point into the content. Not only is this great for screen readers, it's also part of developing for the semantic web, which is generally good for SEO and page structure. So you're covering a lot of best practices if you follow these conventions. Below this, you can see the annual report, and clicking on that to show you what the code shows here, we can see H2 is here. So again, they're following a very strict sequence of content on this page. All right, so next up for some of the other guidelines, we're going to show the NGINS website. This website actually employs an accessibility widget, which I'll highlight as well. To start, though, we're going to cover guideline 2.3, which is allowing users to avoid content that could cause seizures due to photosensitivity. This may seem fairly obvious, but the implementation might seem a bit more complicated than it needs to be. All right, so as you can see, we're on the NGINS website, and there is a video playing in the background. Fantastic video, but for some users, this might not be preferable. This could actually create issues, potential seizures. So they need a way of turning this off, ensuring that the site is not going to be dangerous for them to use. If you see in the lower left, we have this icon for accessibility, and this is what I referred to before as the accessibility widget. Clicking on this is going to give me a dialog box. And in this widget, I will be able to control a range of items within the website. We won't cover everything, but widgets like this are becoming more prominent these days, and they tend to help you get about 80% of the way there when it comes to accessibility. As you can see, we're going to look for this item stops blinking and flashing of moving elements. And as soon as I toggle that, as you can see, the video has now stopped playing, and it has stopped any sort of animation across the entirety of the site. So now I can navigate the site without the fear of a potential seizure due to photosensitivity. All right, so the next project we have up is the Ontario Association of Architects. This is another great example site, but we'll just be covering one of the simple guidelines here. So guideline 3.2, make the placement and functionality of content predictable. I also like this guideline just because of how obvious it is once you learn a bit more details about it. All right, so what do we mean by making something predictable and consistent? What we really are referring to is something like the primary navigation for a website like this. It might seem like common practice that we always have global navigation for both the header as well as the footer. But you would be surprised what we've seen out there where navigation is inconsistent from page to page. It is a very easy solution to just have these global navigation elements consistent, so that way users can always find what they're looking for and understand where they are. This does go a bit deeper in the sense that you can have page titles actually embedded in the code, so that way as a user moves from page to page, they know which page they're on, even if they are using a screen reader. So next up is one of our favorite projects that we did with the Brookfield Institute. It's called the Inclusive Innovation Monitor. It focuses on charting inclusive innovation statistics across Canada and comparing us with other countries. We're going to use this site as an example to cover guideline 1.4, make it easy to distinguish foreground information from its background. I have a few follow-up slides to this to just give you a few helpful tips. All right, so we're on Inclusive Innovation Monitor. As you can tell, we've got a large header, obviously an H1 tag with a call to action. So this website, if you can tell, the contrast with the typography is fairly high. We've designed it this way to guarantee that although it might be colorful, these colors are going to stand alone, even if there are issues with color blindness. And contrast issues have all been weeded out because we're really focusing on high contrast typography and text across the website. So I will show you a bit about the design process for something like this because I think it's important to know where to start. So part of the design process with Inclusive Monitor was establishing a color palette. This is fairly common practice for any creative team or UX team. But what can and should be done a bit differently is testing early and testing often. What that is for us is ensuring that we take a closer look at contrast ratios early on in the creative process, because this guarantees that we're going to be aligned with the WCAG guidelines of 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio, while demonstrating the creative direction of our work. So as you can see, all of our contrast ratios are quite high. One little pitfall of the contrast testing that you might find out there is it doesn't always consider text size. So this is a bit of it can get you into a tricky territory as a false positive if you're just checking contrast. So as you can see on the far left-hand side at that text size, a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 is definitely a pass. Same with the middle one, but the one on the far right is probably a fail. So when you are doing your text and your contrast tests, make sure that you're considering how that contrast works with your text size. Next up, we're going to use Inclusive Monitor to talk about guideline 4.2, ensure that content is accessible or provide an accessible alternative. So as I mentioned earlier, Inclusive Monitor is really about charting stats. And as you can see, we do have graph, definitely essential for a project like this. This graph does have different hover states, and the graph is fully interactive. The problem you get into here is that it is a highly interactive component, and it does demand the use of a mouse. And it's also run by something we call JavaScript, in which case it's fairly difficult to actually allow the screen reader to engage with content like this. But I want to draw your attention to a few items on this page. So first up, we might have this interactive graph, and this graph does tell a story. There is a story that's intended to be imparted on the reader. But that story is actually broken down fundamentally in the rest of the page. So really the key takeaway is, how is Canada doing? What is this metric? Why is it important? So they might not be able to explore the graph in a visual way, but the message of the graph is fairly clear. We've taken it a step further, and we have allowed our users to actually download the graph in a bunch of different formats. So a PNG, a CSV, an SVG. So if they do actually want to engage with the data on a data level and read those stats on their own, they can simply download a CSV. One other key takeaway is that we have a PDF available report that has more information about this graph or this metric in the report. Accessible are a thing, so make sure that those are always on your radar when you're creating PDFs as well. All right, so next up, we have the Macmillan website. The Macmillan website also uses an accessibility widget. It's also pretty neat. You'll see that in the example. So for the Macmillan website, we're going to cover guideline 2.1, make all functionality operable via a keyboard interface. All right, so we're on the Macmillan website. And one thing when we're referring to the keyboard, it's usually the tab key. That is usually what's used to navigate parts of the website. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit tab on the website, and you'll see a lot of things happen. So top left, hitting tab gave me new interface for skipping directly to the content, which allows me to skip down the page, past the navigation, past anything that's maybe not considered content, to just get to the meat of the website. Hitting tab again will skip me to the menu if I were to hit enter. And keep in mind with widgets like this, hitting tab with a screen reader, it's reading these options back to you. So it is not purely visual, but as a visual person, it does help if tabbing is the only thing that you could do through the site. Then the third option is skipping to footer. Continuing to hit tab actually gives us this focus box around items. And that focus box tells us that that item is interactive or clickable via the enter key. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tab over to the Macmillan main navigation. And you can see that that focus box continues through the main navigation. So it continues through the level 1 navigation all the way to level 2. Now, if I want to go forward or backwards, it's as simple as holding shift. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter, and it's taken me to the Our People page. So I've done all of this activity without the need of using a mouse. And we do have to remember temporary disability, low mobility in hands. These are all real issues that anyone can face. You do not need to be permanently disabled to benefit from these features. Having a site that is navigable through a keyboard is great for anyone. The same way that automatic doors are just fantastic if you're carrying a lot of items or if you're using an assistive device. So just something to keep in mind, that accessibility is generally great for all. That's a really important takeaway. So next up with the Macmillan site, helping users to avoid mistakes and make it easy to correct mistakes that occur. For this example, I'm going to take you to one of the Macmillan forms on their website. All right, so as some of you may be familiar with Macmillan's Get in Touch form, it looks like this. And to a visual user, it's a standard looking form. We can click on items here, fill out our name, and continue on. I can tab through the form because Macmillan's site has excellent ability to navigate without the use of a mouse. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is the email field. So let's just put my name in there. I really didn't complete a proper email. And as you can see, we have a prompt from the Macmillan form automatically as soon as I leave that field. Email is invalid. That's really good to prompt the user because it allows them to go back and fix those issues before they submit. By the same token, further down, if we submit the form and we haven't completed our items, I'm going to have to do this CAPTCHA, find all the bicycles. If we submit this form, we can see that it doesn't allow me to submit the form without supplying the required content. So this is very good because these are very explicit warnings as well. Please enter your phone number. Please enter your city. Email is invalid. So very critical for ensuring that users don't make mistakes. This guideline can go a lot deeper because there's a lot of more complicated interactions that can happen online with purchasing and e-commerce. But this is probably one of the more fundamental examples of where this guideline plays a role. So that's it for the examples. One of my closing remarks here is that investing in workflows and ongoing monitoring that continuously supports accessibility initiatives is really crucial for maintaining accessibility as you continue.